part 2 is finally here. It took me a bit longer to get to this than I wanted it to. I'm sorry about that, guys, but let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and get into number 30, Batman Hush. So I do enjoy this film more than a lot of people, and I probably dislike it more than a lot of people too. This is a really in the middle of the road DC animated movie for me. People's biggest gripe with this movie isn't really a gripe for me. I don't really care that they changed the movie from the comic. I don't mind that. I like seeing new stuff. I've never read the Hush comic, but I will one day eventually. I just don't really read much. But if you are a massive fan of that comic and wanted a direct adaptation, I understand why you don't enjoy this film, and not everything worked for me, but I enjoyed this movie enough. This is a film I know a lot of people love, the Lego Batman movie, so let me explain. I do really like this movie, but as a DC movie, as a Batman movie, I don't think it should be any higher because the entire third act, yes, it's Batman. Yes, the main villain of the movie is Joker, and it has Batman's villains in the third act, but the main villains of the third act, outside of Joker, are just Warner Bros. Property villains. You got villains like Voldemort and Zoran, which is really cool to see, but that's not really what I wanted out of a Lego Batman movie. I do think I would enjoy this film a bit more if the third act was just Batman versus all of his villains, and they changed out the first act instead of that happening at the beginning. Save it towards the end so it could be more climatic and more big scope. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with this one, Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I have a review, so you can check that out if you want to kind of get my thoughts on this more. I like all the Batman stuff, I like all the Ninja Turtle stuff, but the things they did with the villains, I know it's in the comic, I know this is faithful to what the comics did, but it just doesn't really work for me. Now to my favorite DC animated movie universe Batman movie, Batman vs. Robin. So I don't think any of the Batman movies within this universe are that amazing, but I think this one is definitely the best. I think it has the best story, I think it has the best interactions between characters. This is probably the movie where Batman and Robin's relationship progresses the most. It has a ton of shifts throughout the movie, and you really get to see that evolve. I think Talon is a great villain. Court of Owls are always kind of interesting to me, but they're not one of my favorite Batman villains, so if I enjoyed the Court of Owls a bit more, this could probably be much higher. And this film also has one of the most memorable lines for me for some reason. I don't even know why I remember this line.
Well, I was trained by Bruce Wayne, and every time they met, he kicked Ra's al Ghul's ass.
The Batman vs. Dracula, it's not that different from the show, but that doesn't take away that it's a damn good movie. The tone in the film is much different than that of the show, though. It's a lot darker, and I love how they incorporate the Joker and the Penguin into the movie. It's actually incorporating elements that you are accustomed to into a Batman vs. Dracula film, and I think all of that is done extremely well and elevates the film. Still not a ton of depth to the movie though, so I can't rank it too high. This film does carry a lot of nostalgia with me though, because I grew up with the Batman TV show, and it's just a fun, entertaining watch. I think that Justice League vs. Teen Titans serves as a great introduction to the Titans in this universe, and I really like to see Cyborg's interaction with the Titans because of course he was originally a member of the Teen Titans, progressed into the Justice League, so I just found it really enjoyable seeing his connections between each of them, how he is a member of the Justice League but he's more of a teen, so he really relates to the Titans. Also, some really interesting stuff in this movie happens in the third act while they're in hell, like what's happening with Beast Boy and then of course Damian seeing Ra's. For a movie titled Justice League vs. Teen Titans though, I really wish we did see more of Justice League vs. Teen Titans. Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. I think Darkseid got much better in this movie. I think he's way better in this than he was in Justice League War. I still don't love Darkseid in this movie. The time jump aspect of the movie is very interesting, but of course that needed to happen. Kinda knew that before going into the film. And the characters they choose to focus on is very interesting to say the least. I just think this movie was too short for how much they were trying to fit in or did force to fit in. For me, I think this movie would have benefited largely if, say, this movie had a 2-hour runtime opposed to the 76 to 80 minute runtime. This is a pretty hit and miss movie with me. Suicide Squad Hell to Pay. I don't think a lot of the humor really hits with me. Some of it does, but the plot elements, the character development in this movie, for most of these characters, only having this film to be developed and to showcase depth was pretty impressive to me. I really got invested with Bronze Tiger, Deadshot, and then of course, how this movie ties into Flashpoint, I absolutely love. That aspect of the film really elevated the movie for me. This is the DC animated movie that surprised me the most, Batman Ninja. So I saw about the first 5-10 minutes, just parts of this movie before I actually sat down and watched the whole film. Thought I wouldn't enjoy it because I've never been an anime fan, so I just assumed I wouldn't enjoy this movie. But when I finally watched it, I was in shock of how much enjoyment I got out of this movie. I think all the characters are done well. It's really interesting to take on all these characters. Still feels like Batman, it's just different, and I like that when it's done well. Gorilla Grodd being the main villain outside of the Joker was really interesting to me, but it worked for the movie, and I also think the voice cast for the film is pretty spot on. Batman Assault on Arkham is a movie with a ton of entertainment value for me. This movie just really falls down the totem pole because of what happens in the third act, in my opinion. I think they just try to force too many villains from the games in just to give you the nod that yes, this is connected with Arkham games. Look at the villains, it's got the Arkham designs, and they just waste those villains, which I found to be extremely disappointing. I don't think everything in the third act is terrible though. I think Joker vs. Deadshot is extremely entertaining, and I think that fight goes the way it should. Then I think the ending to this film is actually pretty perfect. Also, I think the Riddler is criminally underused, and I really just enjoy seeing a good version of the Riddler in an animated movie like this. I love Justice League Dark a lot, mostly because of the characters that are at the forefront of the film. Batman, Constantine, and Zatanna. Some people may complain that Batman's like the main character of a Justice League Dark movie. Well, I wouldn't say he's the main character, but he probably is the main character after Constantine and Zatanna. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have any Batman bias. He is undoubtedly my favorite superhero, but I think it works for the movie. The Justice League Dark, yes, they're these kind of offbeat characters with magical powers, and just having Batman in there, it makes sense because Batman is a dark character. He's not magic, but he obviously believes in and knows about magic, because even at the beginning of this film, he's like, "Are you talking about magic? Then we have to find John Constantine."
Are you talking about magic? Then we have to find John Constantine.
And Constantine is one of my favorite DC characters as well. I just absolutely love the guy. I like everything about him. His personality, his accent, his attitude. Really, the only weak point of the movie is the villain in Dr. Destiny, and I would argue that this movie doesn't really call for a great villain. It just needs a villain that is purposeful to the story, and I think Dr. Destiny works perfectly for that. He's still very formidable. It takes the Justice League Dark and the Justice League to defeat him. Well, it really only takes Constantine, spoilers. But this movie wasn't about the villain, it was about the story. Speaking of villains, this is a movie where I think the villain does make the movie. Teen Titans: The Judas Contract. Miguel Ferrer gives a phenomenal performance in this movie. His voice for Deathstroke is perfection, one of the best performances in one of these DC animated movie universe movies for sure. He's menacing, calm, and collected, as Deathstroke should be. It's extremely heartbreaking that this was his last role, but this was a hell of a role to end on. Just a little side rant here. I think voice acting, voice work in films and movies gets overlooked way too much because it's still acting. That still takes a lot of talent, if not more talent. You have to make an entire character out of just your voice, and it's extremely impressive when someone can do it as well as Ferrer did it in this movie. I wasn't that big on Brother Blood or whatever the other villain was. I don't even remember her name. I obviously wasn't big on her. I didn't love the whole Beast Boy Terra thing. I know that's usually a thing when it comes to Judas Contract. I'm just not a huge fan of Beast Boy, and I know that's an unpopular opinion. But anyway, let's go ahead and get back into the positive side of things. I absolutely love Nightwing in this movie. I like Nightwing and Corey's relationship throughout the film. I think this is probably the most I've ever liked Damian in one of these movies, and all the fight scenes with Deathstroke are absolutely great. Deathstroke versus Nightwing and Robin, it's all incredible to see. And I think the other villain with Brother Blood is Mother Mayhem, if I remember that correctly. Just wanted to add that real quick so I don't sound like an idiot. I know what I'm talking about, guys. Justice League: The New Frontier. So I think this is an absolute must-watch for anyone trying to get into DC animation, or if you're just now getting into it. This is a must-watch. If you haven't seen that many DC animated movies, watch this film. I think the first half of this movie is perfection. I think all the characters get a good amount of screen time, they get good development, and it's really interesting because it's like all of their own personal stories and it's progressing to them finally coming together. But the second half of this movie I don't find as nearly enjoyable as the first half of this film. I think it's still good, but just not as much of the entertainment value is there for me. I mean, there's not a scene like the Batman Martian Manhunter scene that's just absolutely incredible.
Make no mistake though, I have a $70,000 sliver of radioactive meteor to stop the one from Metropolis. With you, all I need is a penny for a book of matches.
Batman Return of the Caped Crusaders, so I have an insane amount of nostalgia for Batman 66. I don't really know if that's common with people my age because it's Batman 66, it's such an old show, right? And someone like me, we already had the Burton films. We were growing up with the Dark Knight trilogy. Had shows like Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, all the DCAU shows, The Batman. We had so many versions of this character, but if you are really a Batman fan, if you're a true Batman fan, you gotta have respect for Batman 66. Adam West put Batman on the map. Would Batman be as big as he is now without Adam West? Maybe, but I don't know. Adam West and Batman 66 undoubtedly was such a huge stepping stone for the character of Batman, and it helped etch his name into history. So yeah, that's basically just a long-winded way of saying I love this film. I love the nostalgia you get from watching it. This is just like watching a long episode of the show, except it's animated, and it was so nice seeing something like that 50 years after the show ended. I probably enjoy Constantine City of Demons more than most, and that's probably in large part due to how much I like Constantine. I think he's extremely underrated as a character. He's definitely gotten more popular as the years have gone on, but I think I just love him so much because I just connect to him. I connect to him as a character. And I'm usually not that big on magic or like demons and stuff like that, and unless it's Constantine, because I think it's the interplay Constantine has with the demons or whatnot, whatever he's facing. The interplay between him and the other characters is just so perfect just because of the dialogue Constantine gives. That's another thing I love about his character. His humor usually always hits with me, when he's written well at least. I just gravitate more towards the darker humor than actual quote-unquote funny humor, I guess. Nargel is one of the better villains in one of these connected movies, and I really thought the city of London being an actual person yet being a city at the same time was such an interesting concept to the movie. And the story is so extremely personal and emotional. If you haven't seen this movie, check it out, seriously, it's worth it. This movie basically just brought me back to my childhood. Scooby-Doo and Batman the Brave and the Bold. Yes, there were Scooby-Doo and Batman crossovers in like the 70s or 80s, and I saw those when I was younger. I really enjoyed them. But this movie shocked me by how actually good it was, how well written it was, which it's kind of just an extension of Batman the Brave and the Bold, which that show's written extremely well. And that take on the character is just such a thoughtful and caring take on Batman. Yes, it's more campy, but that show can be serious. If I had to explain Batman the Brave and the Bold, I'd probably say it's like Batman 66 meets Batman the Animated Series while paying homage to the Silver Age of comics. But yeah, the two biggest parts of my childhood were probably Batman and Scooby-Doo, and always seeing them together brings a smile to my face and just takes me back to that time, which is always nice. And the detective element of this movie is so heavy, and it's done really well. This movie had me thinking at points, and I didn't see the reveal coming, but it makes perfect sense. I think Superman Red Son takes political elements and touches on them well, taking the conflict of the Cold War and just taking the conflict between countries, the Soviet Union and the US mainly, of course. It was done extremely well in this movie, and political plots are something that are always very hit and miss with me. It's either done really well or really bad, usually for me anyway, and I think Superman Red Son did it in an excellent way. I really liked when you saw the younger Batman when he was in the cave, and then of course present day, he's older, he's become the Soviet Batman. Very rare to see Batman as the bad guy, or quote unquote bad guy, and that is still up for debate. I mean, really, even that aspect of the movie is kind of political. Like, is there a good guy? Is everyone crooked? Is everyone bad? Is everyone the villain of the story?
I am the villain of the story.
I love seeing how much Wonder Woman had to do in this film, and I really love the ending of the movie. I like the direction they took Superman's character. This is a movie that I believe fans are really divided on. Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero. So I have a ton of nostalgia for this movie. I watched this film so much growing up, but that's not the only reason I love it. I do think it's a legitimately good movie. Yes, it just feels like a longer episode of the show with some better animation. I do think the animation in this film is better than it is in the actual show, which is something I don't even think Phantasm accomplished. I think the animation in Phantasm looks exactly like it does in the show, but you can tell At points the animation looks really weird in this movie, but most of the time the animation does look crisper, it looks cleaner than it does in Batman the Animated Series. So they do use CG time from time in the show, and it always looks weird to me, and in this movie, I think it's used better than it is in the show. I think the CG looks better. You know, they could probably afford more since this was a movie, but at points it still looks weird. I mean, it's 1990s CGI. And this movie obviously didn't have a massive budget or anything. But also, I've always loved this adaptation of Mr. Freeze. Of course, this is the version of the character where Mr. Freeze just launched up the stratosphere of Batman villains. This changed Mr. Freeze forever. I love that Mr. Freeze has polar bears. I love the chase scene in this movie. I love Dick and Barbara's relationship. Seeing how much Freeze truly cares about his wife, Batman's great in this movie. I just wish we saw more screen time with Batman and Freeze actually together on screen at the same time. You don't get that until the third act, which is kind of disappointing, but I still love this movie. This is probably in a lot of people's top 10, coming just outside of mine, The Death of Superman. This is without a doubt the best interpretation of the Death of Superman story. This would be a bit higher if there wasn't another Superman film where I think Superman as a character and Superman's morals are displayed a bit better for me. That's what I really attract to when it comes to Superman as a character. But this movie has a great emotional story, great characters, love how they incorporated the Justice League, the love story between Clark and Lois, it's all there, it all hits. Doomsday is, for being a mindless villain, he's great in the movie, he serves his purpose, he destroys, he kills, that's what he is, that's what he does. Also, probably the most I've liked Lex in any of these movies. I usually don't really care for Lex in these movies, I'm not crazy about his take in this universe, but I think in Death of Superman, just showing that Lex, he wants to be the hero. He always wants to be the hero of the story. He wants people talking about him. And how much balls he has for that to happen. Absolutely love seeing that. And then, of course, I mean, it's in the title, so even if you haven't seen it, Superman's sacrifice and the end of the movie, just so emotional, impactful. And I just love Superman so much in this movie. I think Batman Gotham by Gaslight is an example of taking the comic, making it into the movie, making changes to that comic for the movie, and making the story better. So obviously I'm not going to spoil who the Ripper is, but I think the reveal in the movie is much better than it is in the comic. I think the movie benefits from making that change. I think this is a great Elseworlds tale. It incorporates basically all the Robins in somehow, some way. This is one of my favorite takes on Selina ever. Bruce Greenwood voices Batman, and Bruce Greenwood is my second favorite voice to Batman, just behind Kevin Conroy. This is also probably the most I've ever liked the Batman-Catwoman relationship. I've never been a huge Batman-Catwoman fan, but I really enjoyed in this film. The action throughout the movie is extremely entertaining. This is of course a dark movie. It's about the Ripper just killing women, quote-unquote cleansing them, and I just love the aesthetic of this movie. I love the feel. I like how dark it feels, how dark it is. Of course there's a mystery element to the movie, which means you get to see Batman do so much detective work, and I always love mystery stories that they're done well, and I think this one is done extremely well. I just love everything about the film. So those were my number 30 to number 11 picks for every DC animated movie ranked. Next time will be the top 10, probably what you are all waiting for. Hopefully I can get that out way quicker than I got this part out. So let me know the choices you agree with, the choices you don't agree with. Do you hate me for any of my choices? You know, all that. Seriously though guys, if you enjoyed, leave a like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.
We are heroes tonight.